Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Stand Your Ground Studio. This is Scott. If you've been watching my playlist, The Road to World War III Exposes the Hierarchy, you'll know I've talked about how a lot of corruption's coming out soon, but also we need to eventually start talking about how we got into these two wars in the Middle East and how that ties into all the terrorism we're fighting, and that we'd also be diving back into the 20th century to use it as a framing device to show how we got here, like history's repeating itself. And today I got another confirmation that that's happening. So you remember I've talked about the Pentagon Papers before, where there's a giant data leak showing the administration was not listening to intelligence gathering whenever that intelligence didn't fit their agenda. So real quick from this article from 1971, it mentions how John McCain, the director of CIA, was against the incrementalism that was happening where we gradually put in troops. He said we have to try for a knockout blow in Vietnam or get out. So I'll go ahead and read a quick description of Vietnam, and you can go ahead and copy and paste it over to what's going on in the Middle East. We can expect requirements for an ever-increasing commitment of U.S. personnel without materially improving the chances of victory. We will find ourselves mired down in combat in the jungle in a military effort that we cannot win, and from which we will have extreme difficulty extricating ourselves. So that's pretty obvious enough. And like I said in my earlier video entitled ISIS Will Spread Like a Cancer, I mentioned how there's going to be an accounting of how we got here in the two wars, what did we gain from it, what did we spend, and it's going to start to become more public. And in this article right here, I talked about how despite all the money and all the lives lost, the Taliban hold more territory now than at any time since 2001. In terms of Western goals, things are right back where they started, needing to keep Afghanistan free of extremists and a viable country for its people. Without that result is thousands of refugees in Europe, and ISIS gets a new safe haven, and we have an even worse enemy than when we started. On top of that, we're actually still going to have troops in Afghanistan into 2017 at least, and here we have Ashton Carter saying, we have 3,500 boots on the ground in Iraq already. We're actually looking to deploy more, so we're scaling up going into 2017. And remember that name, Ashton Carter. So the amounts he's talking about is not overwhelming. It's an incremental increase because we're just doing enough to prevent ISIS from gaining more ground. Because if we don't do that, the humanitarian crisis gets worse, and then ISIS is allowed to infiltrate places like Europe, even worse, and we get this damning cycle that continues. So instead of delivering a knockout blow, we're putting in just enough troops to keep the fight going at a time when they promised us we'd actually be pulling out of those countries. So keeping that in mind, look at what came up today. John McCain says ISIS fight reminds him of Vietnam. Senator John McCain warned Tuesday that the Obama administration's grudging incrementalism in the fight against ISIS risks a failure akin to the Vietnam War. As a young military officer, I bore witness to the failed policy of gradual escalation that ultimately led to our nation's defeat in Vietnam War. McCain is the chairman of the Senate Armed Services Committee. He wrote in a letter to Defense Secretary Ash Carter, who's the guy I just pointed out. McCain said that he fears the nation's current strategy of grudging incrementalism in the war against Islamic State risks another slow, grinding failure for our nation. Conversations he has had with military commanders confirm for him that the military's actions have shifted from considering what it will take to win to what they will be allowed to do by the administration, which really echoes a lot of what was going on in the Pentagon Papers. It became very political. As the Senate Armed Services Committee weighs the Defense Department's 2017 budget request, McCain said he and his committee must have full insight into the scale and scope of the U.S. military operations against ISIL. McCain worried that members of military will pay the price. This, he said, is unacceptable. So going forward, there's going to be more of an accounting of what's happening, and we're going to have to decide before we go any further and get lost in maybe another Vietnam, how did we get here, and what's the price, and what's the payoff for all this? This is going to demand that we start looking at our recent history to see how we got here. Now imagine a whole bunch of corruption that's coming up at the exact same time and all the money and how maybe the Bushes were tied to the Saudis and who knows what else. You're going to see how a whole lot of public outrage is going to start to come up. Somebody's going to have a crisis of conscience and come up and say, that's it, this is how we got here, this is why we're in this war. So you can see how these threads are beginning to converge with one another, and this is just a quick confirmation of what I've been talking about. If you're new to this channel, go to my playlists, The Road to World War III Exposes the Hierarchy, and just start watching it down and seeing how I'm sticking to a very broad theme. There's a story at play, and no matter what details come up, certain things have to happen, and this is one of them. So, keep an eye out for more details. Let me know what you think. Thanks for watching. I'll talk to you next time.